This training has been set up to specifically help collectors participating in the Vermont eCycles program to understand the difference between covered electronic devices that are collected at no charge to the public or the facility through a manufacturer-funded program, and those electronics that are not paid for through that same program but are still banned from being disposed of in the regular trash. When your facility collects for the manufacturer-funded electronics or eCycles program, the very first thing you need to look for is what that customer is bringing to your facility. If it is one of the devices listed on the top of this poster, these are devices that could be covered by the free program. Notice I said could because these devices, if there are more than 7 of them, must be from a Vermont entity. Let's look at the first step in your evaluation process. Let's look into some of the details of what it means for an electronic waste to be paid for or free to be dropped off at a facility. First, a television of any kind of television, one that belonged to your grandmother in a wooden console cabinet that sat on the floor like a piece of furniture, all the way up to rear projection TV, flat panel TVs, 24-inch, up to 146-inch if that's how big they are. It's a TV and it's covered by the program. Next, a computer. That could be a tablet, computer tower, a laptop, really anything that meets this definition. If you're not sure, contact the state and ask. There are always new devices coming on the market. Along with the computer comes a computer monitor. Those, like televisions, can be any kind of a monitor that goes with the computer. Anything from flat panel display monitors, and there are various technologies and sizes there, to cathode ray tube monitors. Next, a printer for a computer. This includes desktop printers, multifunction devices such as a printer that faxes, copies, and prints. Again, the definition also identifies specific printers that are not covered by the program. Mainly, what you could receive is a floor-standing printer or a very large printer used by schools, hospitals, and large businesses. And they are obviously not desktop printers. Anything else in the printer category that you are not sure about, again, contact the state or the eCycles program for their advice. Last but certainly not least, and this can be a large category, computer peripherals. Very basically, a computer peripheral is anything that cannot function without a computer, and it must either provide input or output from the computer. For instance, an uninterrupted power supply is commonly used to keep the power going to a computer if the power is lost, mostly in businesses. But that same device can be used for maintaining power for many things, not just a computer. So in this instance, it's not a computer peripheral because it can be used for other things. The most common peripheral would be a keyboard, a mouse, scanner, computer speakers, remember only used for computers, a modem, and all the cords that are used for only computers, monitors, printers, and television. Anything that's part of a covered electronic device, even the internal components, are covered by the eCycles program. Basically, there are 2 requirements that will help you to identify what electronic waste is covered or paid for under the eCycles program. The first requirement identifies what is covered. We just talked about all those devices. Who can bring their electronics to a collection facility at no charge is equally as important because you can have covered devices or covered electronics, but it must be dropped off by what is called a covered entity. So let's examine that list. First, your covered entity must be a Vermonter who resides in Vermont, either full-time or on a seasonal basis. This is a Vermont law for waste that is generated in Vermont. So this is the first covered entity in the law. Any Vermont covered electronic waste that is dropped off at your facility in a quantity of no more than 7 devices. In other words, if anyone comes in with 7 of the covered devices we talked about, Those devices can be dropped off at no charge. The law says if 7 covered devices are dropped off at any one time, it is presumed to be from a covered entity. You don't have to check if you've got 7 devices or fewer as to who has brought them in. But what if a customer brings in more than 7 devices that are covered electronic waste? Computers, monitors, printers, televisions, or computer peripherals. This is where you must know the specific information on who is dropping off the waste. 7 devices or less, you don't need to ask. A truckload of televisions, you will need to see if they are one of these covered entities. If they are, no limit to the number of covered electronic devices that can be dropped off at your facility. Let me say that again. No limit to the number of covered electronic devices they can drop off at your facility at no charge. Let's walk through this list of covered entities. First, a Vermont household. A Vermont household has no limit to the number of covered electronic devices they can drop off. That's the easy one. A charity. There are lots of organizations that consider themselves charities, but for this program, the entity would need to have a 501c3 designation as a charity. That is your question. If the answer is no, they are not a charity. But hold on to that thought for just a moment. Next, is the customer a school district? If they are a school district or part of a school district, they are covered. Free for covered devices, no limit. If the school is not part of a school district, such as a university or a private school, they are not a covered entity. They can drop off the 7 devices, yes. Hold on to that thought as well and ask your customer with a truckload of televisions one last question. Are you a small Vermont business with no more than 10 total employees? That includes all employees of that business. If they say yes, they have no limit on the number of covered devices they can drop off at your facility. This includes that small private school that's not a school district, and that charity without the 501c3 designation. In addition, and covered electronics are the only waste that is like this. The person dropping off the covered electronic waste does not need to be a part of your district or town. They can come from anywhere in the state to drop off covered electronics, and those covered electronics cannot be refused from a covered entity. The only time a facility can refuse covered electronic devices from a covered entity is if that facility is at capacity. You're full. In which case, the facility can offer a date and a time for the customer to return once electronics have been picked up by the recycler. Now that we've talked about the eCycles program for covered electronic devices from covered entities, let's talk about all of the electronics in the state that are banned from the regular trash. This poster, which can be provided by the state, shows all electronics that cannot be placed in the regular trash in Vermont. There are the ones that are free and paid for by the manufacturer program that are listed at the top of the poster and are shown as free. We talked about those covered electronic waste from covered entities. Those need to be kept separate from any other waste as they are being weighed and the manufacturer pays for their proper recycling. They need to be labeled at your facility as covered electronic waste. And there needs to be a date as to when the first device is placed in the Gaylord for collection. Why? Because these wastes cannot be kept on site for more than 1 year. And if an inspector arrives at your facility, this is how you can prove the length of time the waste has been on site. The date. Notice that the 1 Gaylord is labeled and the 1 TV placed on a pallet also should be labeled. If multiple televisions are placed on 1 pallet, preferably screen to screen, 1 label is all you need for the entire pallet. The remainder of the banned electronics, as you can see on this poster, are not part of the free manufacturer-funded e-cycle program, but they also cannot be placed in the regular trash in Vermont. The difference between these electronics, referred to as non-covered, they are not covered by the program or free for collection and recycling. Although they cannot be placed in the trash, they can be metal recycled if they meet the requirements set up by your metal recycler. Second, these are the only electronic devices currently banned from landfill disposal. Anything that is not on this list is not banned in the law. Now let's focus in a little more on the list of non-covered electronics that are banned from landfill disposal, meaning the ones that are not paid for by the manufacturers through the e-cycles program. Now let's take a look at the list. Personal electronics such as personal digital systems and personal music players such as CD players, cassette tape recorders, or other personal music players. All telephones, including cell phones, answering machines, and fax machines, not covered by the program. Video cassette recorders, better known as VCRs, digital versatile disc, DVD players, digital converter boxes, and stereo equipment, not covered electronics, banned from landfill disposal. Power supply cords used to charge electronic devices, any cords that are associated with these non-covered electronics. And last, electronic game consoles. Let's think for a moment about non-covered waste. Remember, to be covered electronic waste that's free for drop-off, it has two requirements. It has to come from a covered entity, and it has to be a device that is covered by the program. There is a time where covered electronics might not be covered. Remember, it must not be just covered electronics, but from the right customer. So we just covered the list of non-covered banned electronics. We have established if anyone brings them into a solid waste facility, they are not covered by the e-cycles program, and therefore, if a facility decides to charge for that device, they are able to do so. It's pretty straightforward. But what about electronics if it's not on this banned list? You should use your own judgment in how your facility manages other types of waste to determine their destination. This is to make certain you know what electronic devices are banned from the trash by law. This list could change over time, so keep in touch with the state for any of those updates. What other items can be non-covered? What if a large business with more than 10 employees brought in a truckload of covered electronics? Would that be covered? Remember, for covered electronic waste, it must be both covered electronics and from a covered entity. So a truckload of television from a large hotel chain, as an example, covered electronics, but more than 10 employees. You can accept the waste and charge for the recycling. You would put the televisions in the non-covered electronics gaylord, as they would not be covered. But if that same entity brought you 7 electronic devices, the law says just 7, and it's presumed to be from a covered entity. And as a collector, you wouldn't have to check. Now let's take this in another direction just to make sure we have this clear. If a household brought in a VCR or a stereo, would it be collected at no cost? Would it be covered by the program? A VCR or a stereo is not covered under the program, but they are banned from landfill disposal. So the devices that are banned but are not free under your program are personal electronics, telephones, VCRs, DVDs, power supply cords. So since they're not free for your recycling, then you can charge the customers for the recycling of these banned electronic devices. The main things to remember is not all electronics are banned from landfill disposal. Let's take a look at some commonly misunderstood items and see if you remember about covered and non-covered. First, is a plastic vacuum cleaner banned from landfill disposal? The list would certainly tell you that quickly. Plastic vacuum cleaner. No, but any of the banned non-covered is mostly metal can go into metal recycling. These plastic vacuum cleaners would not be banned from landfill disposal. What if a business with more than 10 employees brings in 15 computer towers, 15 monitors, and 2 TVs? Is this covered by the eCycles program, or is it non-covered waste? Remember, 10 or more employees. These devices are banned from landfill disposal, and since there are more than 7 devices and it is from a non-covered more than 10 employees entity, it is non-covered electronic waste and will be placed in the non-covered gaylords if you are accepting both. If you have more questions, go to ecycles.vermont.gov or call the telephone number on the screen, 802-522-5736. The last resource is the procedure for the environmentally sound management of electronic waste, which has all the management standards. Go to ecycles.vermont.gov, click on Collector Resources tab, and look for the procedure. Thank you for your time.